Good evening. Good evening, all of you. Am I audible? Good evening, Prathamesh. So, if you are joining the session for the first time, this is Dr. Shanmugapriya. I am Professor and Head of the Department of Biochemistry at Government Thoothukudi Medical College. And I am your Unacademy educator for Biochemistry. And today's YouTube live session will be on enzymes. Good evening, Haripriya. Namaste, Mahadev. Clerk, Nikita, yes, thank you. Sai Kiran, hello. Thanks. So today I will be telling you all about enzymes. We'll start with definition of enzymes and then we'll discuss classification of enzymes, because I often see MCQs on classification of enzymes, which can be purely a factual question which you will be able to score easily. Okay, so we'll discuss about classification and then we'll discuss about concepts behind enzyme kinetics, because many a times we find it difficult to solve an MCQ based on enzyme kinetics, so that will also be discussed today. So that's the plan for today's session. Good evening, Abhinandini. Next exam postponed to 2026. I'm not very sure about that, Jatin. I'm not very sure about that. Okay, so can we start discussing? And before we start the discussion, let me tell you a few facts about Unacademy plans. Special class features include interactive live sessions. You will be able to participate in polls, and using the raise a hand option you will be able to interact with the educator one-on-one, and you can get your doubts clarified real time. And apart from all these special class features, if you have an Academy app, you will be able to write as many free tests as possible. Yeah, so there are multiple free tests which are happening, and I would strongly recommend that you take up as many tests as possible, because that will help you understand where you stand. The revision session starts on 20th. Yes, Prathamesh, I will be starting the revision sessions on 20th evening 6 to 7. And probably the next part of the revision session will be between 9 and 10, so that we finish it soon. So 2 hours a day. You don't have to read anything more. Okay. So that's about free tests. And there is a NEET PG combat exam for this month, which is happening on March 20th. The time would be 12 p.m. and the topic would be cardiovascular system, Lineweaver-Burke plot. Yes, you will be clarified about all your doubts on Lineweaver-Burke plot today. I will tell you about it. Which book to follow for PG entrance? The standard book I would say is Harper. Okay, so we'll discuss about all these questions after we are done with the discussion on enzymes. How to study in first year MBBS. I will have that in mind, Mahadev. And towards the end of the session today, I will help you understand it. Okay. So NEET PG combat exam is on March 20th at 12 p.m. Total number of questions would be 40 questions, and the duration that is provided will be 60 minutes, and the topic is cardiovascular system, and it's a scholarship exam. I hope you all know that about NEET PG combat. It's a scholarship exam. So if you happen to get rank number 1, you get 100% plus scholarship for 12 months subscription. Rank 2, again 100% scholarship for 6 months subscription. And apart from this, so till rank 25 you get scholarships, and between rank 26 and 50 you get Amazon gift vouchers. Yeah, and leave alone all these prizes and gifts, do definitely try this NEET PG combat exam to know all about cardiovascular system. And the plus subscription gives you an access to both live and recorded classes. It also gives you an access to a question bank with 25,000 plus clinical case based MCQs. And all these MCQs are framed based on the latest pattern. Iconic subscription gives you an access to both Unacademy platform and PrepLadder platform. And if you happen to have either a plus subscription or Iconic subscription, you will be able to access all the batches which are happening right now on the platform. So if you are a NEET PG aspirant, we have NEET PG All Educators Revision batch. It is for the May 21, 2022 exam. It starts on March 16th. The duration would be 2 months. And the speciality of this batch is all educators will be handling their subjects, and totally there are 130 hours of revision. And what is more important is this course will include subject-wise tests followed by subject-wise test discussion by the educator. And you will be able to write 8 grant tests, so that will give you confidence in appearing for your NEET PG exam. So that's about all educators batch. If you're an FMG aspirant, you can try Focus FMG 2022 batch. The duration would be 2 months. And these are our toppers in the latest FMG December 2021. And usually, if you use any of the educators code, you get 10% off. And currently, we have unlocked 20% happening till tomorrow. So if you use any of the educators code, you will get 20% off on all subscriptions. So you can use any educators code. You can use my code, which is C Shanmugapriya or Biochem Live, to get 20% off. And this is the current plan that is available. If you want a plus subscription, the minimum that you can opt for is 2 months. Till yesterday, I think it was 3 months subscription. Now it is only 2 months subscription that you can opt for, which would cost you 6,800. Iconic subscription, minimum duration that you can ask for is 6 months, and the cost would be 32,000. And apart from plus and iconic subscription, now there is also a light subscription which will enable you to write only tests. You don't have to, you won't have an access to live and recorded sessions, but if you get light subscription, you'll be getting an access to all grant tests and plus tests. And that duration will be 3 months. And as I told you, 20%, this is inclusive of 20% discount. Okay. So that's all about Unacademy plans. Let's now start discussing these MCQs. So this is the first question for you all today. All of the following are proteins except. Can you all try answering? I want the chat box to be active. Hi Sachidanand. Try to give me the answer for this question. All of the following are proteins except amino acid, tRNA synthetase, peptidyl transferase, RNA polymerase, siRNA dicer. Paul Praveen Kumar says B. Some of you say it is D. Okay. So what does Prathamesh say? Yeah, it is choice B, peptidyl transferase. Peptidyl transferase is an RNA. Yeah, peptidyl transferase is an RNA. Have you all learned that all enzymes are proteins? Yeah, all enzymes are proteins with few exceptions, which are RNAs. Such RNAs with enzymatic activity will be called as ribozymes. An example for ribozyme will be peptidyl transferase. So peptidyl transferase is nothing but 28S rRNA. All of you memorize all the facts as and when I tell you, because I will tell you only essential and must know facts. Okay. So what is peptidyl transferase? It's not a protein, it's RNA. Which RNA is it? It is 28S rRNA. So it is a ribozyme. So can we discuss what are enzymes? I will just quickly tell you what are enzymes. Enzymes are biocatalysts. Why do we call them as biocatalysts? Catalysts because they increase the rate of the chemical reaction without getting utilized during the process, nor do they get generated during the process. That is why we call them as catalysts. Why bio? Because they are made up of biologically important macromolecules. Most commonly proteins with few exceptions, which are RNAs. So can you all give me examples of RNAs now? RNA enzymes, ribozymes, RNA enzymes. Example will be peptidyl transferase. I told you, right? Peptidyl transferase, and the enzymatic activity it exhibits is it shifts the growing polypeptide chain from P site to A site. Had you attended my session on translation, I would have explained in detail about what peptidyl transferase does. For now, 28S rRNA is a ribozyme, and the enzymatic activity it exhibits is peptidyl transferase. And the other example for ribozymes will be snRNAs, which take part in splicing. Do you all understand this? snRNAs which take part in splicing. Yeah, 23S rRNA is in prokaryotes. Mahadev, good, you remember that. 23S rRNA is in prokaryotes, 28S rRNA is eukaryote. Okay. So how do they increase the rate of the chemical reaction? This is often asked in INI CET. How do they increase the rate of the chemical reaction? By reducing the activation energy. Yeah, what do? They reduce the activation energy. And if you want to know in short what is an activation energy, you have to look at this graph. So this is a graph that is drawn with reaction progress. We call it as reaction coordinate. Yes, we call it as reaction coordinate, which is drawn with reaction progress along x-axis and energy difference along y-axis. And suppose you have a set of substrates of high energy. Yeah, suppose you have a set of substrates of high energy which react to form a set of products of low energy. Yeah, you expect them to go from this state to this state directly, right? Suppose you have a set of reactants of high energy which react together to form a set of products of low energy, then we expect the chemical reaction to proceed directly from reactants to products. But that is not how they act. Any reactant will react together to form a transition state. Yeah, any reactant will react together to form a transition state of higher energy. And that transition state will then break down to give rise to products. And the energy that is required to form this transition state, is called as activation energy. Yeah, that is called as activation energy. Can you see that here? Yeah, so reactants do not directly react together to form products. What do reactants do? Reactants always react together to form a transition state that breaks down to form products. Okay, and the energy that is required to form that transition state is called as activation energy. Higher the activation energy, longer will be the time that is required to form the transition state. So the rate of the chemical reaction will be very less. So what do enzymes do? Enzymes form a different transition state which involves lesser activation energy. Can you see that here? What do enzymes do? Enzymes form a different transition state which involves lesser activation energy. So lesser time will be required to form the transition state. So higher will be the rate of the chemical reaction. So are you all clear about this? Yeah. So if you are asked how do enzymes reduce, how do enzymes increase the rate of the chemical reaction, your answer should be by reducing the activation energy. Do you all understand this? By reducing the activation energy. And I want you all to remember that your enzymes do not change the enthalpy. All of you please listen to this. Your enzymes do not change enthalpy. They do not change the equilibrium. They do not change the equilibrium. They do not change the equilibrium constant of a chemical reaction. Have you all memorized it? Your enzymes do not alter enthalpy. They do not alter the equilibrium. They do not alter the equilibrium constant. Enzymes only reduce the activation energy of a chemical reaction. Okay. So can you answer this now? All of the following are proteins except. What will be your answer? It is peptidyl transferase, which is 28 sRNA in eukaryotes and 23 sRNA in prokaryotes. Yes. So now answer this. All are ribozymes except. Another question based on ribozymes. All are ribozymes except. What will be your answer? Your answer will be tRNA. Yeah, your answer will be tRNA because I told you peptidyl transferase is a ribozyme and all snRNAs are ribozymes. What are snRNAs? snRNAs are of 6 types, U1 to U7 except U3. Yeah, snRNAs are of 6 types, U1 to U7 except U3. So all these are snRNAs, all these are ribozymes. So what should be your answer? Your answer should be tRNA. So this is something which I want to stress more about, classification of enzymes. Generally, we think that we have understood the classification of enzymes, but there are very minute or very fine details, yeah, which we tend to miss. And this discussion will address all those fine detail deficiencies. Okay, so listen to this carefully. 11-month infant presents with convulsions, vomiting, apathy, jaundice and hepatomegaly. His ammonia level is high. Yeah, it is hyperammonemia. There is high uracil, orotic acid and citrulline levels. Already I have started giving answers. Very good. Akanksha says it's choice D. Sai Kiran also says it's choice D. Many of you have answered it as choice D. Okay, let's try to understand it. So there is high uracil orotic acid and citrulline, but argininosuccinate levels are low. If citrulline level is high, can we call it as citrullinemia, all of you? Mahadev also thinks it's D. Paul Praveen Kumar thinks it's B. Okay, so can we call it as citrullinemia, all of you? Because citrulline level is high and argininosuccinate level is low. So what is it? It is citrullinemia caused by a defect of argininosuccinate synthetase. Do you all understand this? It's citrullinemia caused by a defect of argininosuccinate synthetase enzyme. So they are asking you synthetase enzyme belongs to which class? Do you all now understand that it is not lyase? Yeah, many of you had chosen it as lyase. Had it been a lyase defect, what do you think would have happened to argininosuccinate levels? If lyase is defective, argininosuccinate levels should have been elevated. Because that level is low, it is not lyase defect, it is synthetase defect. Is that clear? And if it's a synthetase, it belongs to class 6. Yeah, argininosuccinate synthetase belongs to class 6, which is ligase. So can we discuss about classification of enzymes now? Yeah, so tell me, how many classes do we have? Totally, how many classes do we have? We used to say we have 6 classes. Now, including translocases, we have 7 classes of enzymes. So, what is the first class? The first class is oxidoreductases. Yeah, I want you to remember them in the right sequence. You cannot just randomly remember everything. The first one is oxidoreductase. The second one is transferase. Yeah, the third one is hydrolase. Fourth one is lyase. Hydrolase, lyase. And both sound similar, right? Hydrolase and lyase sound similar. So the fifth one is isomerase. Sixth one is ligase. That is why I told you synthetases belong to ligase class, which is class 6. And the last one is translocase. Okay, so can you quickly type it in the chat box? What are the 7 classes of enzymes? The first one is oxidoreductase. Second one is transferase. The third one is hydrolase. Fourth one is lyase. Hydrolase and lyase sound similar. So the fifth one is isomerase. Sixth is ligase. And the seventh one is translocase. Now tell me, what are oxidoreductases? The name tells you an oxidoreductase enzyme catalyzes either oxidation or reduction of a primary substrate. Do you understand this? Oxidoreductase will catalyze either oxidation or reduction of a primary substrate so that the secondary substrate or the coenzyme will undergo reduction or oxidation. And the name of all these enzymes will end with oxidase, or it will end with reductase, or it will end with dehydrogenase, oxidases. So the name by itself will tell you that's an oxidoreductase most of the times. Okay, I will tell you about exceptions in a short while. For now, this is about oxidoreductases. Now, what are transferases, all of you? Transferases will transfer a group. Transferases will transfer a group from one substrate to another. What does a transferase do? It transfers a group from one substrate to another. So, A plus BX will be the product. Okay, that's about transferase. Now about hydrolase and lyase. Listen to this carefully. Hydrolase and lyase, always compare and contrast these two classes of enzymes, because both hydrolases and lyases can cleave a linkage. Do you all understand this? Both hydrolase and lyase can cleave a linkage. Hydrolases will cleave a linkage by adding water. Lyases will cleave a linkage without adding water. Are you clear about this? What is the difference between hydrolase and lyase? Hydrolase cleaves a linkage by adding water. Lyases will cleave a linkage without adding water. Now, what kind of linkages can be broken by adding water? Only ester and ether linkages can be broken by adding water. Why? What is an ester linkage? How do you form an ester linkage? An ester linkage is formed between an alcohol and an acid. Yes or no? An ester linkage is formed between an alcohol and an acid. Can you see that here? ROH, this is an alcohol that gets attached to RCOOH, which is an acid. So what gets removed in the center? Water gets removed in the center. So after water gets removed, you get an ester linkage. If removal of water can form an ester linkage, what will happen when you add water? Yeah, if removal of water can form ester linkage, what will happen when you add water? So H will go and get attached to it forming ROH. OH will get attached to it forming an acid. So addition of water can break which linkage, all of you? Addition of water can break either ester linkages or ether linkages. So can you all give me examples of ester linkages that are present in your body? Example for ester linkages present in your body would be peptide linkage. The best example would be peptide linkage or any amide linkage or phosphate linkage. Yeah, peptide linkage, amide linkage, phosphate linkages. All these are examples of ester linkages. Now what are the examples of ether linkages? Best example for ether linkage would be glycosidic linkage. O-glycosidic linkage is present in carbohydrates. Have you all learnt about alpha 1,4 linkage, alpha 1,6, alpha 1,1, all of you? Yeah, alpha 1,4, alpha 1,6, alpha 1,1. What are those linkages? All those are glycosidic linkages, O-glycosidic linkages. And then N-glycosidic linkages are present in nucleosides and nucleotides. Yeah, N-glycosidic linkage is present in nucleosides and nucleotides. What is your doubt, Ragnar? If you have any doubt, please type it. Is it for FMG or PG? I always say this, there is no delineation between what an FMG is supposed to learn and what a PG is supposed to learn. Ultimately, your aim is to get concepts right. Okay, because there is a huge transition in how FMG question papers are being asked. Now we have case-based MCQs even in FMG, image-based questions in FMG. So there's not going to be much of a difference between what an FMG aspirant is expected to know. Okay, so most of my sessions will be catering to all those who are preparing for any competitive exam or for any qualifying exam, because my teaching is conceptual. Does that clarify your doubt, Ragnar? Okay, so what are the examples of hydrolases? So hydrolases will be breaking these ester linkages or ether linkages which I told you about just now. So example will be esterases. Example for hydrolases will be esterases. And then breaking peptide linkage, you will call them as peptidases, amidases, proteases. Yeah, peptidases, amidases, proteases. Phosphatases, phospholipases. Okay, phosphatases, phospholipases. So all these are ester linkages which are broken. And to break ether linkages, I said ether linkages are present in carbohydrates. So glucosidase. Yeah, glucosidase breaks the alpha 1,4, alpha 1,6 linkages. So glucosidase. And then ribonuclease, deoxyribonuclease. Okay, nucleosidases, nucleotidases. So all these are hydrolases. So my net is slow. Okay, no problem. Okay, no problem, Ragnar. So that's about examples of hydrolases. So have you all understood the examples of hydrolases? Yeah, hydrolases means immediately what should come into your mind? It should be breaking either an ester linkage or an ether linkage. So just recollect ester linkages: esterases, peptidases, amidases, phosphatases, phospholipases. Recollect ether linkages: O-glycosidic linkage in carbohydrates. So glucosidase, nucleosidase, nucleotidase, ribonuclease, deoxyribonuclease. Okay, so that's all about hydrolases. Now what are the examples of liases? Yeah, so if it's a liase, what did I tell you about liase? Liase also breaks a linkage without adding water. Now which type of linkage can be broken without adding water? It has to be either a CN linkage or CC linkage. Do you all understand this? It has to be either a CN linkage or CC linkage. So what are the examples of liases? Don't you think names of these enzymes will end with liase? Yeah, names of these enzymes will end with liase. And when I say it breaks a linkage, will you all agree with me if I say all chemical reactions are reversible? Yeah, all chemical reactions are reversible. So if a lyase can break a linkage, when you reverse it, it is going to form a linkage. So when it forms a linkage, you will call it as a synthase. When it forms a linkage, you will call it as a synthase. All of you get this registered in your mind. If you see that the name of the enzyme ends with synthase, yeah, do not just add et and say synthetase. Synthases are different from synthetases. Synthases are lyases. Do you understand this? Synthases are lyases, whereas synthetases are ligases. Okay, so if the name of the enzyme ends with lyase, or if the name of the enzyme ends with synthase, then they belong to lyase class, class 4. Okay, and then hydratase and dehydratase. Okay, hydratase and dehydratase. What do these enzymes do? They add water or they remove water. So hydratase, dehydratase. And then decarboxylase. What does a decarboxylase do? It randomly breaks a linkage, removes carbon dioxide. Yeah, it breaks a linkage, removes carbon dioxide. It's not using water. So decarboxylase is also an example of lyase. So have you memorized all these? Yeah. So what will come under lyase class, all of you? Under lyase class, you have to include lyases, synthases, hydratases, dehydratases, and decarboxylases. Okay. So can we fill this tabular column? I need your support. Synthases also break and synthetases also. Yeah, synthases break and form. Synthetases forms. I will tell you the difference between synthase and synthetase in a minute, Binay. Yeah. So now can you fill this tabular column? What are the differences between hydrolases and lyases? Both can break a linkage. Hydrolase will break a linkage by adding water. Lyases will break a linkage without adding water. What kind of linkages are broken by hydrolases? Hydrolases break ester and ether linkages. Whereas lyases break what kind of linkages? Lyases break, yeah, CN and CC linkage. Now what are the examples of, what are the examples of hydrolases? Examples of hydrolases will be esterases, amidases, peptidases, proteases. You don't have to write anything. I will be sharing the PDF soon, both in the community and in the Telegram group. Okay, so you don't have to write anything. Listen to this. So esterases, amidases, proteases, peptidases, phosphatases, phospholipases, yeah, phosphatases, phospholipases, glucosidase, yeah, glucosidase, ribonuclease, deoxyribonuclease. So all these are examples of hydrolases. What are the examples of lyases? Breaking a linkage without adding water. The name will end with lyase or it ends with synthase. Hydratase, dehydratase, yeah, hydratase, dehydratase, and finally decarboxylase. Okay, so this fill tabular column will help you in revising, so don't write anything. Okay, so that's about differences between hydrolases and lyases. So we are done with the first 4 classes of enzymes. Now about isomerases. It's a self-explanatory term, right? What does an isomerase do? It converts one isomer to another. So example for isomerases will be isomerases, right? Or it can be a racemase, because racemism is a type of. Give an example for hydratase. Have you learnt about a hydratase that acts in fatty acid oxidation, Prathamesh? Yeah, in fatty acid oxidation you have a hydratase which adds water and it converts unsaturated acyl CoA to beta hydroxy acyl CoA. Remember that, beta hydroxy acyl CoA. So hydratase adds water and that's an example of lyase. Okay, dehydratase. You have a dehydratase that is acting in fatty acid synthesis, that removes water and introduces a double bond. Can you share the link of your Telegram group? You search for my name as Biochemistry Dr. C. Shanmugapriya. Yeah, you'll be able to find it. Okay. So that's about isomerases. So what are the examples of isomerases? Isomerases, Prathamesh, have you understood it? Yeah. So racemase, epimerase, yeah, racemase, epimerase, mutases. So can anyone tell me what is a mutase? We know about isomerase, we know racemase, we know epimerase. What is a mutase? Mutase shifts a group. Yeah, mutase shifts a group from one carbon atom to another. For example, if you want to convert 3-phosphoglycerate to 2-phosphoglycerate, do you see that the molecular formula of both are the same? Yeah, the only difference is you have shifted the phosphate group from one carbon atom to another carbon atom. So this is done by a mutase enzyme. Yes, within the same compound. Very good, Sai Priya. Excellent answer. So that's a mutase. So all these are examples of isomerases. Okay. Now about ligases. So what I want you to know about ligases, ligase also forms a linkage. Yeah, ligase also forms a linkage like lyase. Did I tell you? Lyase breaks the linkage. When you reverse the reaction, it can form a linkage. So both lyases and ligases can form a linkage. But the basic difference is ligases use ATP. While forming a linkage, ligases use ATP, lyases do not use ATP. So do you understand the difference? Yeah, one of you was asking me about synthesis and synthetases, right? So that's the difference between lyases and ligases. Both lyases and ligases form a linkage. Ligases use ATP as a source of energy. Lyases do not use ATP as a source of energy. And lyases will include synthesis. Yeah, lyases will include synthesis. Ligases will include synthetases. For example, argininosuccinate synthetase. Argininosuccinate synthetase belongs to which class? Ligase class, which is class 6. Yeah, that is class 6. And then carbamyl phosphate synthetase 1 or carbamyl phosphate synthetase 2. Again, they are ligases, class 6. Do you all understand this? Synthesis come under class 4. Synthetases come under class 6. Synthases are lyases, synthetases are ligases. And then decarboxylases. Did I tell you that decarboxylases are lyases? Yeah, whereas carboxylases are ligases. Carboxylases are ligases. So in all my special classes and plus classes, I've told you the requirements of a carboxylase. Can anyone type that here in the chat box? What are the requirements of carboxylases? Any carboxylase has got 3 requirements. One is they need carbon dioxide in the form of bicarbonate. They always need carbon dioxide in the form of bicarbonate. They all need ATP as a source of energy. And they always need biotin as a coenzyme. Yeah, they always need, very good, BBA. Good, Abhinandani. So what does BBA stand for? BBA stands for, the first B stands for bicarbonate. The second B stands for biotin and A stands for ATP. So these are the requirements of carboxylases. So carboxylases they form a linkage by using ATP. So carboxylases are ligases. Decarboxylases are lyases. This in 2021, my NEET score is 521, but I didn't get any college in India, so I had to choose China option for my MBBS. So I'm first year student in China, so please guide my... Yeah, I will tell you, Mahadev. Let's wait. Towards the end of the session, I will tell you about what the first year student has to do. Okay? So that's about differences between lyases and ligases. So tell me, what are the differences between lyases and ligases? Yeah, decarboxylases need B6. Good. So lyases do not need ATP. Ligases need ATP. Lyases are synthases. Ligases are synthetases. Decarboxylases are lyases and carboxylases are ligases. Okay. So that's about ligases. Now finally about translocases. So what do translocases do? Translocases will translocate a substance from one subcompartment to another subcompartment. Do you understand this? They just translocate a substance from one subcompartment to another subcompartment. For example, even sodium potassium ATPase pump is considered as an enzyme. So that comes under which class? That comes under translocase class. Okay. So can we summarize? Yeah, can we summarize few facts here? So what are oxidoreductases? I told you oxidoreductases oxidize or reduce the primary substrate. And there are few facts that you have to know about oxidoreductases. The first one is about hydroxylase. Now my question to you all is, can you tell me hydroxylase belongs to which class? I will give you 30 seconds time. Hydroxylase belongs to which class? I am not asking about hydratase or dehydratase. It is hydroxylase. What is a hydroxylase? It is a monooxygenase. What does a monooxygenase do? Suppose the substrate is RH. You are taking any substrate RH. What will a monooxygenase do? It will allow oxygen molecule to react with RH. One oxygen atom gets incorporated into RH. Yes, Sai Kiran is right. Paul Praveen Kumar is also right. Benai, listen to this. So what does a monooxygenase do? Monooxygenase allows one oxygen atom to get incorporated into the substrate, converting RH to ROH. And the other O will become water. Yeah, the other O will become water. So this is a monooxygenase. And what does this monooxygenase do? It introduces oxygen atom, right? And it forms a hydroxyl group. So monooxygenases are nothing but hydroxylases. So hydroxylases belong to which class? Can you answer it now? Hydroxylase belongs to oxidoreductase class. Do you understand this? Hydroxylase belongs to oxidoreductase class because it incorporates oxygen atom into the substrate, converting the substrate into hydroxylated product. Okay, this is one point wherein you might go wrong. The second point wherein you might go wrong is about catalase. Catalase belongs to which class? Can anybody tell me? Catalase belongs to which class? What does a catalase do? Catalase allows two molecules of hydrogen peroxide to react. Yes or no? Catalase allows two molecules of hydrogen peroxide to react. One H2O2 becomes water. Yeah, one H2O2 becomes water and the other H2O2 becomes oxygen molecule. Yes or no? When H2O2 reacts with another H2O2, these two hydrogen atoms will get added to one molecule, forming two molecules of water, and the other one becomes oxygen. So what is happening here? Simultaneously, the substrate is getting oxidized and reduced. So catalase belongs to which class? Very good. Catalase belongs to oxidoreductase class. Okay. Now tell me kinase. Kinase belongs to which class? These are the frequently asked facts. That's why I'm giving you as points to remember. What does a kinase do? Kinase transfers. Yeah, it transfers a phosphate group from ATP to another substrate. It transfers phosphate group from ATP to another substrate. So which class does it belong to? Kinases belong to transferase class. Yeah, they belong to transferase class because they transfer phosphate group from one substrate to another. And then glycogen synthase. Yeah, so tell me about glycogen synthase. This was asked once in NEET. Glycogen synthase belongs to which class? The moment you see synthase, you might think it's a lyase. You might think it is class 4. No. What does glycogen synthase do? Glycogen synthase transfers glucose residues from UDP glucose. Yeah, that's what we tend to think, Abhinandini. But what it does is glycogen synthase transfers glucose from UDP glucose to glycogenin. Yeah, from UDP glucose to glycogenin. It literally transfers glucose from one substrate to another. So glycogen synthase belongs to which class? Glycogen synthase belongs to transferase class. Okay. So these are the facts that wherein you might go wrong as far as classification of enzymes is concerned. Okay. So oxidoreductases, you have to include hydroxylase and catalase. Transferases, you will usually have trans in the name like transketolase, transaldolase, acyl transferase. So in that case, you won't have any confusion. But if it's a kinase, you should know it's a transferase. Glycogen synthase is a transferase. Okay. And then what do you know about lyases and ligases? Yeah, what did I tell you about lyases and ligases? Or before that, tell me about hydrolases and lyases. Hydrolases add water and lyases don't need water. Okay. Now hydratases and dehydrotases belong to which class? Can anybody answer this? Hydratase and dehydratase. They add water or they remove water. They belong to lyase class. Yeah, hydratase and dehydratase, they just add or remove water. So they belong to which class? Lyase class or class 4. Very good. And then decarboxylases. Yeah, decarboxylases are lyases, but carboxylases are ligases. So are you clear about classification of enzymes? Hydratase use water but do not break. Yes. Hydratases, what they do is they incorporate water into the substrate. Do you understand this, Prathamesh? Hydratase incorporates water into the substrate. It does not break a linkage. Whereas hydrolase adds water and it breaks a linkage. Do you understand this? Yeah. So hydratase belongs to lyase class. Hydrolase belongs to hydrolase class. Get it, Prathamesh? So what is the answer here? The answer here is, it's citrullinemia. Citrullinemia is caused by a defect of argininosuccinate synthetase. If it's a synthetase, it belongs to which class? Synthetases are ligases. Yeah, synthetases are ligases, which means it is class 6. Okay. I will be happy if you can all answer this. Please tell about dioxygenase. Dioxygenase, the name tells you, Rajandeep Kaur. Dioxygenase adds oxygen. It adds the whole oxygen molecule into the substrate. So it is oxidizing the substrate. So which class will it belong to? If it oxidizes a substrate, it belongs to oxidoreductase. Is that clear, Rajandeep? Yeah, very good. Glycogen synthase. I'm very happy that all of you have answered it right. It is a transferase. Pranali, I think you came late. Pranali, I told you glycogen synthase is a transferase. It's not a ligase. Catalase is an, what is a catalase? I told you catalase catalyzes simultaneous oxidation and reduction. Now it's fine, ma'am. After 1 week, you tend to forget. That happens, Sai Kiran. It's not only your fault. It happens to everybody. That is why you should keep revising. Yeah, you keep revising. You download the PDF which I'll be sharing in the group. Yeah, so keep revising multiple times. Yes, catalase is an oxidoreductase. Very good. Carboxylase. Carboxylases are good, all of you. Very good. Carboxylases. What did I tell you? What are the requirements of carboxylases? I said BBA. What does BBA stand for? Biotin, bicarbonate and ATP. If an enzyme uses ATP and it forms a linkage, it is a ligase. Biochem is very tough to remember. It's not the fault of the subject. It is because from the very first year, you either tend to think that this subject is not necessary or you tend to think that the subject is not interesting. Yeah, in either case, you do not stimulate that particular synapse with 100% concentration. Yeah, that is why those synapses have not been strengthened from your very first year. And that is why you tend to think that biochemistry is volatile. Actually, all subjects have equal number of facts. All subjects have equal number of concepts. It's just the way by which you approach the subject. Yeah, once you change the approach for your biochemistry, then you will understand that biochemistry is as easy as any other subject. Is that clear? Binay Agarwal. Okay. So carboxylases are ligases. All of the following are oxidoreductases except. What is answer? Recently started watching your classes on Unacademy, fell in love with your explanations, it became easier. I am happy, Shilpa, I am happy that you are loving my explanation. When is your book releasing? It will be a game changer. I am just working on it. I don't get time to finish it. Probably after your NEET exam, I will finish it. Okay, until then it's a busy schedule for me. After your NEET PG, I will finish it. All of the following are oxidoreductases except, yes. It is glucose 6-phosphatase. How to tackle biochemistry in these 2 months? It's not something which you should tackle. In these 2 months, if you want to finish biochemistry, then you can attend high yield sessions like this and work out MCQs. Okay. And apart from attending high yield sessions, work out MCQs and then retrospectively read the concept and then memorize it. The only way to memorize any fact and concept is repetition. Okay. So it is not like you allot like 2 to 3 days for biochemistry. You read biochemistry and then close the subject and expect you to remember everything. Even after you finish biochemistry, you should always be in touch with not only biochemistry, any subject for that matter. And that is why I always ask you all to attend grant tests and solve grant tests. When you solve grant tests, you don't have to segregate the subject and solve it. Yeah. Suppose when you have 200 MCQs in every grant test. So every day spend like 2 hours just for grant test related activities, wherein you randomly work out like first to 20 MCQs on day 1. 21 to 40 MCQs on day 2. So those first 20 MCQs will not be pertaining to only one subject, right? So it is going to be a mixed subject revision. So you should always be doing mixed subject revision when you have only 20 months to, when you have only 2 months to face the exam. Okay, so every day after you write a grant test, you allot like 7 days or 10 days for working out that grant test. 20 MCQs every day, finish that grant test in 10 days. You will be able to touch every subject every day. And that's the only way you can be in touch with all the subjects. Is that clear, Binay? Okay. So let's start discussing kinetics now. So far it was like a bit dry, right? It's a bit dry because all these are factual discussions. So now it's more of conceptual discussion. I like to do this. So Michael is mentioned doing MCQs on an Unacademy app of different subject, like 2 to 3 subjects. Yes. You don't have to get disappointed or demotivated. Every wrong answer is a chance for you to learn that concept. Okay. So 2 hours, Sai Kiran, 2 hours. Michaelis Menten equation is used for enzymes following which kinetics? Can you all answer this? Is it linear kinetics or saturation kinetics or sigmoidal kinetics or hyperbolic kinetics? Michaelis Menten equation is used for enzymes following only saturation kinetics. So what do I mean by saturation kinetics? If I draw a graph, listen to this, look at the presentation here. No, it is not hyperbolic, it is saturation. Yes, I have a Telegram channel. Search for me as Biochemistry Dr. C. Shanmugapriya. Okay. So if you draw a graph with substrate concentration along x-axis and velocity along y-axis, substrate concentration along x-axis and velocity along y-axis, I want you to think and tell me, what do you expect to happen to velocity as you increase the substrate concentration? All of you tell me. As you increase the substrate concentration, the velocity of the enzyme catalyzed chemical reaction will also increase linearly like this. But do you think it will keep increasing forever? No. At one point, even if you increase the substrate concentration, the velocity will not be able to increase and it reaches a plateau. Yes, Prathamesh, it will reach a plateau like this. Why does it reach a plateau? It is because at that point, all the enzymes substrate binding sites have been saturated with the substrate. Do you all understand this? At this point, all the enzyme substrate binding sites have been saturated with the substrate, so that beyond that point, even if you increase the substrate concentration, you won't be able to increase the velocity. That maximal velocity that is achieved, that maximal velocity that is achieved when all the enzyme substrate binding sites have been saturated with the substrate is called as Vmax. So do you all understand what is Vmax now? What is Vmax? Vmax is the maximum velocity that is achieved when all the enzyme substrate binding sites have been saturated. And can you see that here this Vmax is not achievable? Do you see that I have not allowed the line to touch Vmax line? Yeah, it was not a mistake. It was deliberately done. Yeah, I want you to know that Vmax is never achievable. Why do you think it cannot be achieved? Because enzymes are just catalysts. How much ever you increase the concentration of the substrate, all catalysts are required only in minute quantities. And after every chemical reaction is over, it gets regenerated. Do you know that? Enzymes get regenerated. So both in vitro experiments and in vivo experiments, never have we been able to increase a substrate concentration to saturate all the enzyme substrate binding sites. So Vmax is never measurable. And that is why we have a term called as half Vmax. Because Vmax is never measurable, we have a term called as half Vmax. So at half Vmax, you draw a horizontal line, it cuts the curve. And from here, you draw a vertical line to cut the x-axis. And that point is called as Km. Yeah, that point is called as Km. So can you all read Km? What is Km? Look at this. Km is the substrate concentration. What is Km? Km is the substrate concentration at half maximal velocity. Have you all understood this? Km is the substrate concentration at half maximal velocity because Vmax is never achievable. Now, what do I mean when I say Km is high? Just tell me, what do I mean when I say Km is high? When I say Km is high, I mean to say only when the substrate concentration is high. Yeah, I mean to say only when the substrate concentration is high, this enzyme can achieve half maximal velocity. If the substrate concentration has to be high, it means its affinity is low. Do you all understand this? If substrate concentration has to be high, it means its affinity is low. So if I say Km is high, I mean to say affinity is low. Is that clear to all of you? Yeah. So have you understood this graph? Yeah. So Vmax is never measurable. That is why we have a term called as half Vmax. At half Vmax, you see at what point it cuts the x-axis. That is called as Km. So what is Km? Km is a substrate concentration at half maximal velocity. And if you say Km is high, you mean to say the velocity is low. Okay. And based on this, we have Michaelis-Menten equation. So what is Michaelis-Menten equation? All those who are attending this session, my humble request is that you have to memorize this equation. You cannot manage without knowing Michaelis-Menten equation. Okay. So what is Michaelis-Menten equation? I will tell you about double reciprocal plot in the next question. For now, it is not about the plot, it is about the equation. In the equation, we don't do any reciprocals, Binay Agarwal. Yeah, so what is Michaelis-Menten equation? V is equal to Vmax into S by Km plus S. Where what is V? Can you all tell me what is V? V is the velocity. Yeah, V is the velocity of an enzyme catalyzed chemical reaction for a given substrate concentration. Do you understand this? It's the velocity of an enzyme catalyzed chemical reaction for a given substrate concentration. And what is Vmax? I told you Vmax is the maximum velocity that is achieved when all the enzyme substrate binding sites have been saturated. Okay. And what is Km? Km is Michaelis constant, substrate concentration at half maximal velocity. Okay. So when can you use this Michaelis-Menten equation? You can use this Michaelis-Menten equation only when enzymes follow saturation kinetics. Not all enzymes follow saturation kinetics. Some of your enzymes follow sigmoidal kinetics. When do you think enzymes can follow sigmoidal kinetics? When it is an oligomeric enzyme, an enzyme with multiple subunits. For example, lactate dehydrogenase. Yes, CK, lactate dehydrogenase, creatine kinase, all these enzymes have multiple subunits. So all these multiple subunits do not follow saturation kinetics, they follow sigmoidal kinetics. And for an enzyme which follows sigmoidal kinetics, Michaelis-Menten equation cannot be used. What are we going to use? Instead of this, we are going to use Hill's equation. Do you all understand this? Instead of that, you can use Hill's equation. Please memorize this. Okay. So tell me what is the answer now. Michaelis-Menten equation is used for enzymes following which kinetics? It is used for enzymes following saturation kinetics. What is the answer here? Equation used to study the kinetics of enzymes following sigmoidal kinetics is. Very good. Yes, saturation. For the next question. Equation used to study the kinetics of enzymes following sigmoidal kinetics is Hill's equation. Good. So Binay Agarwal had a question in the previous question, and this question is based on that. So true about double reciprocal plot. So if you want to read a pharmacology journal, yeah, wherein they express about a new drug that has been identified, and they just show you a Lineweaver-Burke plot or double reciprocal plot, and they expect you to find out what kind of inhibition it is. Okay. To be able to do that, you need to know the concepts behind double reciprocal plot or Lineweaver-Burke plot. So Rajandeep Kaur Daliwal says it's choice D. True is that. Anybody else? Can anybody else try this? So true about double reciprocal plot is Rajandeep is right. Binay Agarwal is also right. Minus 1 by km is the x-intercept. For this question, the answer is minus 1 by km is the x-intercept. So let me first tell you the significance of Lineweaver-Burke plot or double reciprocal plot, and in the next question I will tell you how to use it. Okay. So the application of double reciprocal plot is that Michaelis-Menten equation is V is equal to V max into S by Km plus S. So do you think you can use this equation straight away? All of you, do you think you can use this equation straight away to know what would be the velocity of an enzyme catalyzed chemical reaction? We cannot use it. Why can't we use it? Because this V max is never measurable. I told you, right? V max is never measurable. And that is why we are going to take a reciprocal on both the sides. So I want you to be listening to this discussion with patience for another 5 minutes. Okay. So if you watch the session for the next 5 minutes, you will be able to interpret any Lineweaver-Burke plot. Okay. So listen to this. Because this equation cannot be used straight away, we are going to take a reciprocal on both the sides. So when you take reciprocal, won't you think it becomes like this? Yes or no? 1 by B is equal to Km plus S by B max into S. And do you want a common denominator like this? I don't want a common denominator. So what am I going to do? I am going to write it as 1 by V is equal to Km by V max into 1 by S plus S by V max into S will become 1 by V max. Do you all understand this? Yeah, instead of having it as a common denominator, I have just split it as 1 by V is equal to Km by V max into S by 1 by V max. And don't you think it is in the form of y is equal to ax plus b? Yeah, y is equal to ax plus b, where what is y? Y is 1 by b. What is x? Yeah, 1 by s is x. Yeah, this is in the form of y is equal to ax plus b. And this means if I draw a graph, yeah, if I draw a graph with 1 by v along y-axis, I said 1 by v is y. So if I draw a graph with 1 by b along y-axis and 1 by s along x-axis, I am going to get a straight line. Can you see that here? This animation is working. Okay. So can you see that here? If I draw a graph with 1 by b along y-axis and 1 by s along x-axis, I am going to get a straight line. So how will I draw this graph? All of you listen to this. How will I draw this graph? Suppose I have an enzyme. Let's consider it as hexokinase. I have extracted hexokinase from a person. I want to know what is the Vmax of this enzyme and what is the Km of this enzyme, which is not directly measurable. So what I would do is I will take this enzyme and I will provide this enzyme with various substrate concentration. I will start with 0.05 millimoles. I will increase it to 0.1 millimole, 0.5, yeah, 1 millimole, 1.5, 2 millimole. So at various substrate concentration, I will see what is the rate of product formation and I will fill it here. So for various substrate concentrations, I know the various velocity. So for various 1 by S, I will know various 1 by B. So can I draw a graph with that? I have various 1 by S and various 1 by V. So if I draw a graph with that, I am going to get a straight line. And if I extrapolate the straight line, yeah, if I extrapolate the straight line, this straight line will cut the y-axis at one point and will cut the x-axis at another point. And if I find out at what point it cuts the y-axis, yeah, I'm not going to tell you the derivation of it, yeah, because it's not that necessary. But do you know the concept? To find out at what point it cuts the y-axis, you should put x is equal to 0. And to find out at what point it cuts the x-axis, you should put y is equal to 0. So if I put this and I solve it, I will get the y-intercept as 1 by v max. Yeah, I will get the y-intercept as 1 by v max. I will get the x-intercept as minus 1 by km. Yeah, x-intercept will be minus 1 by km. So can you all tell me about double reciprocal plot? Yeah, so what is double reciprocal plot? I will use this page, yeah, to tell you all about double reciprocal plot. So how will you draw a double reciprocal plot? What along y-axis? Don't you think y and v sound similar? Don't you think y and v sound similar? So how is it drawn? Along y-axis you have 1 by v. And what will you draw along x-axis? Along x-axis, x and s sound similar, right? X and s sound similar. So along x-axis you draw 1 by s. You will get a straight line. And if you extrapolate the straight line, at what point does it cut the y-axis? It cuts the y-axis at 1 by v max, and it cuts the x-axis at minus 1 by km. So if I take a reciprocal of this, I will know what is v max. If I take a reciprocal of this, I will know what is its km. So now do you understand what is the utility of double reciprocal plot or Lineweaver-Burke plot? All of you? Do you now understand what is the utility of Lineweaver-Burke plot or double reciprocal plot? It will help you to know. It will help you to know what is the Vmax and what is the Km of an enzyme. How do I find it? If I have a new enzyme in my hand, I will subject this new enzyme to activity at various substrate concentrations. At various substrate concentration, I will see what is the velocity. So I take a reciprocal of both this and I draw a graph with 1 by v along y-axis and 1 by s along x-axis. I will get a straight line. I will extrapolate the straight line to see at what point it cuts the y-axis. That will give me 1 by v max. If I take a reciprocal of that, that would be the v max. And if I find out at what point it cuts the x-axis, that is going to be minus 1 by km. If I take a reciprocal of that, that will be km. Is that clear? All of you? So this is the significance of double reciprocal plot or Lineweaver-Burke plot. Okay. So can you tell me the answer now, all of you? Double reciprocal plot, what is along x-axis? Do you draw 1 by v along x-axis? No. 1 by s along x-axis. Do you draw 1 by s along y-axis? No. 1 by v along y-axis. What is the x-intercept? X-intercept is minus 1 by km. Yes. So choice D is the right answer. Okay. True regarding competitive inhibition of an enzyme. Yeah, true regarding competitive inhibition of an enzyme is. Can anybody try answering this? Km is increased, Km is unaltered, Km is decreased, Vmax is decreased. Benay Agarwal only got it clarified somewhat. You're not exactly clear. Okay, Sai Kiran says it's choice A. Rajandeep also says it's choice A. Very good. Benay says it's choice D. Competitive inhibition, there is no change in Vmax. As far as competitive inhibition is concerned, there is no change in Vmax. Only Km is increased. So answer for this question is choice A. Very good, Nikita Agarwal. No, Nikita Agarwal is also not right. So Km is increased, the right answer. Now let me tell you about types of inhibition. So what are the two types of inhibition? Reversible inhibition and irreversible inhibition. And most of your drugs, most of the pharmacological agents will be of which category? They will belong to reversible inhibition category. And reversible inhibition is of three types. What are the three types of reversible inhibition? The first one is competitive inhibition. Second one is uncompetitive inhibition. The third one is mixed inhibition. Yeah, please don't tell me it is non-competitive. Non-competitive, I will tell you in a short while. For now, what are the three types of reversible inhibition? Competitive inhibition, uncompetitive inhibition, and mixed inhibition. Okay, first let's learn about competitive inhibition. Normally, enzyme reacts with substrate, yeah, to form enzyme substrate complex. And this enzyme substrate complex will then break to form enzyme and product. You know this, right? Normally, this is not about inhibitor at all. Normally, enzyme reacts with substrate to form enzyme substrate complex that will break to form enzyme and product. Now, what does a competitive inhibitor do? A competitive inhibitor is a substrate analog. Yeah, what is it? It's a substrate analog, and it competes with the substrate to go and bind to the enzyme. Do you understand this? A competitive inhibitor is a substrate analog, and it competes with the substrate to go and bind to enzyme, and it diverts few enzymes to form enzyme inhibitor complex. So the product formation rate is reduced. Because of this, the rate of product formation is reduced. And in this type of inhibition, all that is maximally happening is the probability that the substrate goes and binds to enzyme is reduced. If it is just a reduction in the probability, can you tell me what will happen when you increase the substrate concentration? It is just a reduction in the probability. In that case, tell me what will happen when you increase the substrate concentration. When you increase the substrate concentration, probability that the substrate goes and binds to enzyme is increased. And the probability that the product is formed is increased. Which means the carry home message here is, in the presence of a competitive inhibitor, increasing the substrate concentration can overcome the inhibition. And if you can overcome the inhibition, can you tell me what will happen to Vmax? If you can overcome the inhibition, tell me what will happen to Vmax. Vmax will remain unaltered. Yeah, Vmax will remain unaltered. But to reach that Vmax, you had to increase the substrate concentration, right? To reach that Vmax, you had to increase the substrate concentration. So what happens to Km? Km is the substrate concentration at half maximal velocity. Because you had to increase the substrate concentration here, Km is increased. Okay, so tell me what happens to Vmax and Km in the presence of a competitive inhibitor. You can overcome the inhibition, so Vmax remains normal but Km is increased. Okay, and this will be evident when you draw a Lineweaver-Burke plot. So I want you all to answer me these questions. How do you draw Lineweaver-Burke plot? This will help you in recollecting the information. Tell me, how do you draw it? You draw this Lineweaver-Burke plot with 1 by V along y-axis and what along x-axis? 1 by substrate concentration along x-axis. And what will you get? You will get a straight line. If you extrapolate the straight line, you will know at what point it cuts the y-axis. At what point does it cut the y-axis? It is 1 by Vmax. At what point does it cut the x-axis? It cuts the x-axis at minus 1 by Km. And this is the Lineweaver-Burke plot which you get. Yeah, if this is the Lineweaver-Burke plot which you get in the absence of any inhibitor, yeah, without an inhibitor, what happens in the presence of an inhibitor? Let me show you what happens in the presence of an inhibitor in a black line. So in the presence of an inhibitor, Vmax remains unaltered. And what happens to Km? I said Km is increased. So what will happen to 1 by Km? 1 by Km will be reduced. So if you see a line like this, yeah, if you see a line like this in the presence of an inhibitor, wherein Vmax remains the same and Km has increased, what will be your answer? Your answer will be, this is a competitive inhibitor. Are you all clear about this? Yeah, if you're clear, can I see a thumbs up, please? Yeah. So in the presence of a competitive inhibitor, Vmax remains normal but Km is increased. Okay. Now let's learn about uncompetitive inhibition. So this is summary. So let's learn about uncompetitive inhibition. So what happens normally? Usually enzyme reacts with substrate to form enzyme substrate complex, and this enzyme substrate complex breaks to form enzyme and product. Okay. Now, an uncompetitive inhibitor does not react with the free enzyme. An uncompetitive inhibitor reacts only with the enzyme substrate complex. Yeah, uncompetitive inhibitor reacts only with enzyme substrate complex to form enzyme substrate inhibitor complex, which does not allow the product to be formed. Okay, so what does a competitive inhibitor do? Competitive inhibitor reacts with free enzyme, but uncompetitive inhibitor reacts with enzyme substrate complex to form enzyme substrate inhibitor complex, which will not allow the product to be formed. Now tell me, what will happen when you increase the substrate concentration? Will increasing the substrate concentration overcome this inhibition? No. How much ever you increase the substrate concentration, all these will form enzyme substrate complex, and all these enzyme substrate complex will be diverted to form enzyme substrate inhibitor complex, which will not allow the product to be formed. So increasing the substrate concentration will not overcome the inhibition by uncompetitive inhibitor. If you are not able to overcome the inhibition, now tell me what happens to Vmax. If you cannot overcome the inhibition, tell me what happens to Vmax. Vmax is reduced. Okay. What happens to Km? Km is also reduced. Yeah, just remember it is an uncompetitive inhibition. Both the values are altered parallelly. In uncompetitive inhibition, both the values are altered parallelly. I will tell you why Km is reduced here. Because an uncompetitive inhibitor always diverts enzyme substrate complex to form something else. So this side of the equilibrium, yes, this side of the equilibrium, the concentration is always kept low. So if this side of the equilibrium, the concentration is kept low, then the equilibrium will always try to form enzyme substrate complex. You know, law of mass action, right? What is law of mass action? Wherever the concentration is low, the equilibrium will get shifted to that side. So because this inhibitor diverts enzyme substrate complex to enzyme substrate inhibitor complex, this side of the equilibrium, the concentration is always kept low. So the equilibrium will try to get shifted towards forming enzyme substrate complex. And to form enzyme substrate complex, enzyme and substrate will start reacting with more affinity. Yeah, enzyme and substrate will start reacting with more affinity. 1 second, I think the dog has shifted my camera. Okay, so 1 second. Can you see me now? Yeah. So what happens when the affinity is increased? When the affinity is increased, Km is reduced. Yeah, when the affinity is increased. 1 second. So when the affinity is increased, Km is reduced. Okay. So this is about what happens in the presence of an uncompetitive inhibitor. Give me a minute. Mari? Mari? Can you please come out and help me? Mari, the camera. No. Just shift the place. Thanks. Okay. So this is about what happens in the presence of an uncompetitive inhibitor. Okay. So if you look at uncompetitive inhibition, because the inhibitor reacts with enzyme substrate complex diverting it to form something else, both Vmax and Km are altered in the same direction. Vmax is reduced, Km is also reduced. So now do you understand why Km is reduced? Binay Agrawal. Yeah, why Km is reduced? Because the affinity is increased. So this will be evident when you draw a Lineweaver-Burke plot. Again, tell me, how do you draw Lineweaver-Burke plot? 1 by V along y-axis, 1 by S along x-axis. You will get a straight line. And if you extrapolate the straight line, you will know it cuts the y-axis at 1 by V max. It cuts the x-axis at minus 1 by Km. You used to mug up these concepts. I'm happy that you're understanding it now. Okay, and what happens, this is without an inhibitor. This is the line which you get without inhibitor. Now what happens in the presence of an inhibitor? In the presence of an uncompetitive inhibitor, what happens to Vmax? I said Vmax is reduced. So 1 by Vmax will be increased, right? And I said Km is reduced. So 1 by Km is also increased. So if you see parallelly shifted lines like this, yeah, whenever you see parallelly shifted lines like this, then that is an indication that it is an uncompetitive inhibitor. Yeah, what is the clue that you will have in mind? Parallelly shifted lines, then it is uncompetitive inhibition, because when in uncompetitive inhibition, both Vmax and Km are low. Okay. Now what does a mixed inhibitor do? So mixed inhibitor, normally what did I tell you? Enzyme reacts with substrate to form enzyme substrate complex. That breaks to form enzyme and product. Now a mixed inhibitor, a mixed inhibitor reacts with both the free enzyme and the enzyme substrate complex. So do you understand the difference between competitive, uncompetitive and mixed inhibition? Competitive inhibition, inhibitor reacts only with the free enzyme. Uncompetitive inhibition, inhibitor reacts only with the enzyme substrate complex. In mixed inhibition, the inhibitor reacts with both the free enzyme and the enzyme substrate complex to form both enzyme inhibitor complex and enzyme substrate inhibitor complex, which will not allow the product to be formed. Okay. In this condition, do you think increase in substrate concentration can overcome this inhibition? Increase in substrate concentration cannot overcome this inhibition. So what will happen to Vmax? If you cannot overcome the inhibition, then Vmax is reduced. What happens to Km? In this case, because there is something else which is competing with the substrate to go and bind to enzyme, the probability that the substrate can go and bind to enzyme is reduced. The affinity between enzyme and substrate is reduced. If affinity is reduced, what will happen to Km? If affinity is reduced, Km will be increased. So if you see that both Vmax and Km are altered in the wrong direction. Why do I say it's a wrong direction? You want Vmax to be high, but in this case Vmax is reduced. You want Km to be low, but in this case Km is high. So if both the values are altered in the wrong direction, then that is mixed inhibition. Are you clear about this? That's called as mixed inhibition. Now a special type of mixed inhibition is called as non-competitive inhibition. So what is non-competitive? Non-competitive is a special type of mixed inhibition wherein the inhibitor reacts with both the free enzyme and the enzyme substrate complex with the same affinity. Do you understand this? In the case of non-competitive inhibition, which is a special type of mixed inhibition, the inhibitor reacts with both the free enzyme and the enzyme substrate complex with the same affinity. And in this case, Vmax is reduced. As expected, Vmax is reduced, but Km remains normal. Can we externally increase the affinity of enzyme and substrate? Yes, you can. Because Km is not a directly measured value, right? Km is just an indirectly measured value. So you can alter Km by increasing the substrate concentration, by removing others. So it's just a calculated value. So that can be done, Abhinandini. Okay, so what did I tell you about non-competitive inhibition? Vmax is reduced, but Km is normal. Okay, so can we fill up this tabular column? All of you, will you help me fill up this tabular column? So tell me what happens to Vmax in the case of a competitive inhibitor. In the case of a competitive inhibitor, when you increase the substrate concentration, you can overcome the inhibition. So Vmax remains unaltered. But for that, you have to increase the substrate concentration. So Km is increased. Okay. Uncompetitive inhibition. What happens in the presence of uncompetitive inhibition? What did I ask you to remember? Parallel alteration. Uncompetitive is parallel alteration. So Vmax is reduced and Km is also reduced. Right? Vmax is reduced and Km is also reduced. Mixed inhibition, I said both the values are altered in the wrong direction. So Vmax is reduced and Km is increased. Non-competitive inhibition is a special type of mixed inhibition where it binds with both the enzyme and the enzyme substrate complex with the same affinity. In this case, Km remains unaltered, but Vmax is reduced. Okay, Km remains unaltered and Vmax is reduced. So now answer this question. True regarding competitive inhibition of an enzyme is, we know Km is increased and Vmax is normal. Okay. Now what kind of inhibition is this? Can anyone answer this? Do you see parallelly shifted lines? Whenever you see parallel lines, then what will be your answer? Parallelly shifted lines, what will be your answer? Uncompetitive inhibition. Very good, Sai. Very good, Paul, Selvakumar, Rajandeep, Abhinandini. Yes. It's not mixed. Good, Prathamesh. Good, Nikita. It is B. It is uncompetitive inhibition. Okay. So with this, can we close the session for today? Okay, so this is about enzymes. I've told you what are enzymes. I told you about classification of enzymes. I also told you about enzyme kinetics, and questions are asked only under these topics as far as enzymes are concerned. So try to get the PDF and try to revise it, and all the best. And for first year MBBS students, there are few MBBS students who wanted me to guide on daily. This time you take YouTube classes, not on all days. I will be taking on Sunday and Monday. Which breed? A German Shepherd. We have 2 dogs, German Shepherd. Yeah, in community also I will share the PDF. So first year students, from the very beginning, read biochemistry. Don't get misled by anybody who says biochemistry is not interesting, or if they say biochemistry is not necessary. I would say biochemistry is a foundation for you to learn any medicine related subject. Okay. And for this you have to learn the subject conceptually. Please come out of the factual learning alone, which you have been doing in your school, if at all you have been doing. It has to be conceptual, and try to correlate it clinically, because you are now in a medical education. It's a competency based medical education, right? So for you it is early clinical exposure. So you'll be exposed to multiple cases, and even if you're not exposed to a case, whenever you read a fact or a concept, try to understand why for it. Try to answer the why behind it. Okay. And I would say that you should start learning standard textbooks from the very first year. Do not fall prey for your seniors saying, take this notes, read this notes, just memorize facts, just learn important questions. Only then you start hating the subject. Okay. So read standard textbooks like Harper or Lippincott. Read every fact, every concept. Try to understand every fact and concept. Memorize facts and concepts. Keep repeating it multiple times. Then you will be able to apply the subject. Okay. Why Km is normal and non-competitive inhibition? That involves a multiple mathematical derivation. You have to start from Michaelis-Menten equation and apply few facts. That is not going to be asked to you. Is first year from China in 2021 is not valid. They offer online classes. Yeah, is that clear, Mahadev? Okay. Thank you all. Good night.